The town stirred as the morning sun stretched over dusty streets and glittering mansions alike, casting its golden light on the divide that whispered through every corner. On one side, fine gates opened to marble halls, where laughter and music marked the triumphs of sudden wealth. On the other, children ran barefoot, kicking up the dry earth, while mothers called them in for water or bread, their hands worn from toil. And yet, beneath this contrast, an unseen thread bound them all, ancient traditions that spoke of honor, respect, and the ways of their ancestors. In the quiet of shaded verandas, elders watched the town shift. Their faces, lined with years and wisdom, carried the weight of generations. "See how the young ones forget the lessons of our fathers," murmured one, voice soft but heavy. They chased the sparkle of gold while leaving the heart of the village behind. Across the town, bright suits and flashy shoes became more important than the respect for marriage, for family, for promises made in the eyes of the ancestors. Pride had begun to eclipse humility. Among the town's heartbeats was the wife, her hands still marked by yesterday's work, her eyes calm but carrying the depth of endurance. She moved through the market with grace, giving a kind word to the grocer, a smile to the children, embodying the belief that loyalty and patience are stronger than riches. She carried herself as though she bore the memory of every hardship endured, every promise kept, every silent sacrifice made for love and family. Her husband, once a man of the soil, now strode in a tailored suit, every movement speaking of status rather than sweat. The fields that had shaped him, the neighbors who had shared in his struggles, all seemed distant to him now. His laughter rang in halls filled with strangers, while the humility that had once grounded him crumbled under gold and applause. And then came the mistress, a figure both alluring and sharp, her presence a sweet wind that could turn into a storm. She spoke with words that wrapped around him, feeding the pride he wore like armor. "You deserve more than the past," she whispered, her gaze sharp, "more than anyone who looks at you and sees only what you were." With every step, she pulled him further from the truths that had once held his heart steady, twisting desire into something dangerous. Yet not all eyes were fooled. Behind closed shutters and under the shade of old trees, neighbors whispered. They saw the shift, the breaking of values, the bending of loyalty. An elder, leaning on his carved walking stick, shook his head, eyes narrowed. "The man who forgets the roots of his heart will find only sorrow," he said softly. The words seemed to settle in the air, a warning the wind carried across streets and alleys alike. And still, the memory of love born in poverty lingered. There, in hidden corners of the town, stories of the couple's struggle once echoed, how they had built a life from nothing, how sacrifice and trust had been their foundation. Those lessons remained, even as wealth and pride threatened to erase them, like a quiet ember waiting to ignite when the winds of fate turned. The town watched, knowing the balance between fortune and character, pride and patience, would shape the days to come. The town had grown quiet under the heavy cloak of night, yet the glow of new wealth cast long shadows across the streets. The husband walked with the swagger of a man who had risen far beyond his humble beginnings, but in his chest, pride and shame warred silently. Once, he had knelt beside his wife in the dust of shared struggle, now he looked at her with eyes hardened by gold and status. Respect had faded, replaced by a sense of superiority, as if her loyalty was a burden rather than a gift. The mistress lingered nearby, her voice a silken serpent weaving doubt. "Why do you still serve her?" "She is of the past," she whispered, her words curling around his mind, turning love into suspicion, making him question the woman who had held his heart through years of hardship. Each phrase poisoned the bond they had shared, until the man no longer saw devotion but chains. As midnight fell, he seized her arm with a cold, deliberate hand and pulled her outside. A few neighbors, hiding behind shutters or the corners of the street, froze in fear, sensing the darkness that hung heavy between them. The air seemed to hold its breath, the silence amplifying the cruelty about to unfold. In a single act of pride and rage, he cast her to the side, her body hitting the hard ground beside a trash bin. "You are nothing," he spat, his voice echoing over the empty street. Her dignity, once quietly steadfast, seemed stripped away before the world. The onlookers dared not move, their eyes wide with silent horror, knowing the weight of such betrayal. She lay trembling, the dust clinging to her hair and clothes, her body weak and heart shattered. Her spirit, though battered, flickered faintly in the darkness, a quiet witness to the injustice inflicted not just by her husband but by a society that feared intervention. And yet, in that stillness, the beginning of judgment stirred, a silent promise that cruelty, once sown, would one day return, measured by the unerring hand of fate. Passers-by walked by without word, their eyes averted, leaving her beside the waste. Fear of shame and reprisal held them frozen, showing how quickly society discards those who have been cast aside, their compassion stifled by the weight of silent judgment. Even in abandonment, her quiet suffering spoke louder than the whispers of those who dared not act. The night had swallowed the streets in silence, yet one pair of steady eyes refused to look away. Old enough to have seen the rise and fall of many, the elder neighbor stepped from the shadow, his cane tapping softly against the ground. "This is not the way of our people," he muttered, voice low but firm, carrying the weight of years and wisdom. Without waiting for permission or applause, he knelt beside the trembling woman, lifting her gently from the cold, dusty ground. His hands were calloused but careful, cradling her as if holding the fragile heart of the town itself. He carried her through narrow alleys, past the curious eyes of neighbors frozen in fear, to a humble home tucked beneath the branches of a wise old tree. Inside, a warm fire flickered, a small room offering shelter and care where the world had offered only cruelty. She lay on a simple mat, wrapped in a blanket, and for the first time since being cast aside, felt the touch of kindness replacing the sting of humiliation. As hours passed, she noticed the familiar rise and fall of life within her body, a secret growing quietly. She carried a child. The child, a living proof of love betrayed, yet not erased, stirred a spark of hope where despair had once taken root. Every small kick reminded her that even what is discarded may still hold life and meaning, a future that defied the injustice done to her. Hunger gnawed, and her body weakened, yet she endured. Nights of quiet suffering and sleepless tears tested her, but her spirit remained unbroken. She whispered to the darkness, "I will not curse, I will not allow bitterness to rule me," echoing the teachings of her ancestors. Each day, her patience and quiet endurance reflected the old ways, the dignity that survives when the world turns its back. The memory of the trash bin, once a prison, remained, a cruel reminder of society's tendency to discard what it no longer values. Yet, like the first rays of dawn after the blackest night, she began to rise, her quiet strength radiating, proving that true worth cannot be buried, and the seeds of honor and life, though tested, endure. The man walked through his grand home, the polished floors reflecting the flickering light of crystal chandeliers. Gold and silk surrounded him, a world built from sudden fortune, yet his eyes carried the emptiness of a soul that had forgotten the sweat and soil of his beginnings. Once, he had tilled the land and honored the hands that fed him. Now, he only measured worth in coin and spectacle. "See how far we have come," he boasted to the circle of admirers, his voice proud, but hollow beneath the laughter that echoed off the walls. The nights were loud with music and wine, with drums shaking the very walls as he hosted lavish feasts. Guests clinked glasses, danced in patterned fabrics, and praised his success, yet behind the masks of celebration, a shadow of loneliness grew in the corners of his heart. He looked around, expecting joy, but all he felt was a gnawing absence, the quiet question of what he had left behind. The mistress moved close, her perfume a sweet wind masking a tempest. "You are a man of power now," she whispered, tilting her head, eyes glinting with cunning. "Why heed the old ways? The elders, their rules, they bind you. Freedom is ours now." Each word coiled around his mind, pushing him further from the loyalty and love that once guided him, turning reverence into arrogance, humility into scorn. Soon, misfortune crept quietly into his life. Deals that once promised rivers of wealth collapsed. A shipment lost, a trusted partner gone. Those who had stood by him withdrew in silence, eyes full of judgment, leaving only the mistress's voice to guide him. Even as he laughed at her sly advice, the elders whispered under the baobab tree, "He who forgets the soil of his fathers walks toward his own shadow." Small signs of unrest multiplied. A servant faltered, a horse stumbled, a trusted ledger vanished. The wind seemed heavier, carrying warnings that he could not ignore. Pride had paved his path, and slowly, the edges of fortune began to crumble, as if the earth itself sought to remind him, those who rise on arrogance often fall by it. The mistress, once soft-spoken and alluring, now moved through the house with a sharpness that sliced the air. "Do this. Call that. Obey me," she commanded, her voice honey-laced with steel. The husband, once confident in his own judgment, found himself nodding, his thoughts bending beneath her words. Decisions that once belonged to him, the choice of guests, the direction of his business, even what meals were served, now passed through her hands as if she were the sun, and he, a mere shadow. "Why do you still speak with that old merchant?" she sneered one evening, noticing a familiar friend's visit. "They whisper of your past. Only I should guide you now." Slowly, she severed him from voices of loyalty and truth, twisting every relationship until the man lived in a bubble of her design. The streets, the elders, the friends who had once shaped his honor, all became ghosts in the mist, unseen and unheard. When his fortune began to falter, her smiles cooled. "Perhaps we need someone richer," she murmured one night, letting her eyes wander to a neighbor with a newly filled purse. Love measured not in trust or devotion, but in wealth and status, revealed its true, transactional face. Affection vanished as quickly as the coins slipped through his fingers, leaving only a bitter taste of betrayal. Laughter that once crowned his home with joy now turned to mockery. "Look at you, once proud," she jeered, "drowning in what you cannot hold." The house, filled with his pride, became a hall of shame, with tension thick as smoke and fear simmering silently in every corner. Their arguments became the heartbeat of the night, punctuated by sighs and the quiet regret of what had been. In contrast, the memory of his wife's patience, her quiet strength and adherence to the old ways, shone like the steady flame of a lantern. Tradition stood firm against greed, morality whispered in every empty room. And as the consequences of choices made in pride unfolded, the man learned the hard truth. Betrayal and disregard for what is just always demand their reckoning, and suffering often walks hand in hand with loss. The river of his wealth, once wide and endless, had dried up beneath the scorching sun of misfortune. Coins no longer jingled in his pockets, and the halls of his mansion echoed with silence. The husband wandered through rooms that smelled of opulence but felt empty, clutching ledgers that showed nothing but red. How did it vanish?" he muttered, voice trembling, staring at a life he no longer recognized. Fear coiled in his chest, confusion clouding every thought. He stepped onto the streets where, not long ago, heads had bowed in respect, and smiles had followed his name. Now, whispers drifted from corners, and fingers pointed subtly, carrying judgment like a slow drumbeat. Neighbors he had once counted as friends now avoided his gaze, their admiration replaced with quiet scorn. "See him," someone muttered under their breath. "The man who thought gold could erase his roots." Pride crumbled beneath the weight of shame. The mistress, whose beauty once fed his ego, vanished without a word. Her silken laughter, once the light of his vanity, now replaced by silence, leaving him alone with his losses. She had chosen another, richer and brighter, proving that her loyalty had been nothing more than a mirror reflecting his fortune. And then, fate spoke in the form of a chance encounter. As he stumbled through the market, weighed down by ruin, he saw her, his wife, the one he had discarded like dust. Her stride was steady, her head held high, eyes clear and unwavering. She was no longer the fragile figure he had thrown aside. Strength radiated from her like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The community, once silent in their fear, now gathered around her, offering respect and protection, honoring the dignity she had preserved through suffering. And beside her, a child, a living testament to a love that had endured betrayal, played quietly, laughing. The husband's eyes filled with tears as he realized what he had lost. The life he had cast aside, the legacy he had ignored, now stood before him in human form, a reminder that true value cannot be bought or stolen. The husband stood frozen, the weight of his guilt pressing down like the midday sun over the savannah. He watched her, his wife, calm and unshaken, carrying herself with the quiet strength that had once been invisible to him. His voice caught, trembling. I was blind. I have wronged you beyond words." Each syllable felt heavy, each pause a reminder of all he had destroyed. His heart, once proud and unyielding, now throbbed with the unbearable ache of betrayal. Around them, the townspeople stirred. The whispers that had long hidden behind closed doors now became clear voices, rising boldly. "He has forgotten what it means to honor," one woman said, stepping forward. "And now he must face the truth he refused to see." Murmurs of agreement spread, young and old alike defending the woman whose dignity had been tested and proven unbreakable. An elder, hair white as the clouds over the mountains, stepped forward. The crowd fell silent. "Listen well, children of this land," he said, his voice carrying the weight of generations. "A man who places pride above loyalty will one day be stripped of all. The seeds he planted in arrogance bear only the fruit of sorrow. His words draped over the husband like a cloak of reckoning, and he could feel the truth settling in his bones. The elder's voice rang again, echoing through the gathered crowd. Remember, loyalty is sacred. Pride blinds. Justice, like the river, always returns to cleanse what was taken. The husband looked around, and the faces that once smiled in his presence now held stern judgment. He was alone, discarded like the very trash he had once cast his wife beside. Shame, the same he had inflicted, now consumed him. He lowered his head, tasting the bitterness of his actions. The wind seemed to carry the balance of fate, and in that moment, the scales of justice were restored. No cruelty goes unseen. No betrayal remains unpunished. The story of pride, pain, and redemption had come full circle, and the truth now stood tall where arrogance had once ruled. The husband sank to his knees, the dust of the courtyard clinging to his trembling hands. His chest heaved, and his voice cracked like dry timber. "Forgive me. I have sinned against you. I was blind, and I have brought shame upon the life we once shared." The pride that once ruled him had vanished, leaving only a hollow ache where arrogance and selfishness had lived. He looked up at her, eyes wet, hoping for mercy, yet fearing the silence he had sown. Around them, the villagers watched in tense stillness. Not a word stirred the air. The wife's calm face betrayed nothing, her eyes steady, her lips pressed in thought. Every person present felt the weight of her next choice. The community understood. Her decision would speak louder than the cries of remorse before her. She drew a slow breath, recalling nights of hunger, mockery, and humiliation. She felt the sting of betrayal, yet she did not falter. "I will not return to a place of hurt," she said quietly, her voice carrying strength instead of bitterness. "Forgiveness is not a path to weakness. If you seek it, you must walk the path of change, proving your heart has truly learned." The husband bowed lower, knowing that no gold, no promises could erase the pain he caused. Around them, the air seemed to whisper an old truth, carried on the wind of their ancestors. True worth is measured not by riches or outward show, but by loyalty, character, and honor. Betrayal walks a circle, always returning to teach its lesson, and patience, dignity, and endurance shine brighter than the fire of revenge. In that moment, the wife became a pillar of quiet power, a living testament to the strength of the human spirit, showing all who watched that resilience, patience, and honor carry a weight no pride can overturn. The husband understood, at last, that some wounds heal not through submission, but through respect and the wisdom of tradition. The village held its breath as the story reached its quiet, unyielding end. The husband, once proud and full of arrogance, now walked with bowed shoulders, each step weighed down by regret. The marketplace that had cheered his wealth now whispered of his failures, a stark reminder that the path of pride leads only to sorrow. Children who once played in his shadow now stared with innocent judgment, and neighbors shook their heads in silent acknowledgment of lessons learned the hard way. Tradition, once ignored, had returned like the morning sun, harsh but illuminating. The wife emerged from the shadows, her head held high, her child's small hand in hers. Each movement was grace, each glance filled with the quiet fire of survival. She walked forward as if the earth itself honored her steps, carrying her strength like a crown forged in patience, loyalty, and enduring love. The past had tested her, but she moved with purpose, untouched by the bitterness that had surrounded her. Behind her, the husband remained, a solitary figure in the empty courtyard of his former glory. His silence spoke volumes, echoing with the memories of cruelty, neglect, and lost opportunity. He had become a living lesson, the echo of pride brought low, a shadow against the bright light of the woman he had wronged. From the corner of the square, an elder's voice rose, steady and unshakable, weaving through the wind and the whispers of the village. "Listen well, children," the elder intoned, "for the ways of our ancestors are not forgotten. What is thrown away in pride may return as loss." His words fell like seeds upon the heart of the village, planting understanding, reminding all who heard that honor and humility carry the weight of life itself. And so the tale closed, sealed by fate and wisdom, a story carried forward by those who would remember. Strength endures, pride falters, and justice walks patiently behind the steps of all who stray.